Chilly here with Sirius Dallas Moon. Well, this is Mercury night or Saturday night. I don't have the hour because fundamentalist internet is not operating in a city that's supposed to be secular in Israel. Um, I don't know. But anyway, I did manage to see that today there was a unanimous decision to acknowledge the Saudi-France decision to acknowledge Palestine or a two-state solution. Now, this is as close as we can get to a Palestinian Declaration of Independence. Um, yeah, this is 2 hours ago. I don't have a chart for that, and what we're missing here is actually the Palestinians. So, as a person who have been in my academic era in One Voice before it became trying to assassinate Bibi V15, which is when I walked out to be very deliberately talking about that. And no, I never voted for Benjamin Netanyahu, but not for assassinating a prime minister either. And so, about that time, I remember that there was a Saudi initiation for supposed peace and two-state solution, but the voice that was actually missing was the voice of the Palestinians. And when they were ruled by terror groups, and I know that a lot of people would say, hey, the IDF was a pack of terror groups before it was founded. And again, housing first and believe the patient, and you'll hear a lot more voices in general from all the false flags, um, which is peculiarly fascinating as the false flags are done for resources and real estate. So the crisis, the mental crisis that people go through in wars is actually facilitated by housing first, independent of ability to work, because it's also abolishing slavery, and believing the patient for schizophrenia, schizoaffective, a lot of the parts of DID as well. And that's just, something to ponder about um, in these times. So the approximation of this current decision, and again, what we're missing is the actual Palestinians. We have the entire UN, we have Saudi Arabia, we have France with Macron that has been a leading voice, perhaps a leading voice of peace in this tremendous turbulation, and we don't have the Palestinians. And that is unlike 1948, where we did have the Zionist settlement, or whatever you call it, that was actually listening to the UN declaration and applauding, and that was the beginning of the independence war. And so, if I talk about the planets, we're in between eclipses, which means that if Palestine would be by this declaration, it is basically a country that is an eclipse child, which tells me that, first of all, it will not be easy to control, and secondly, kind of like good thing, bad thing, who knows, and secondly, that there would be a lot of fatal trials and tribulations in the acknowledgement of Palestine. By the way, Israel, I believe, is also an eclipse child. Okay, it has Rahu in Taurus, I believe, and Sun in Taurus. So it's very likely an eclipse child. And we see the fated events that accompany the eclipses, and the eclipses on the Pisces Virgo. Yes, I definitely predicted there to be a declaration of independence for Palestine. Again, we're not yet talking Declaration of Independence. We're talking about an external, almost coerced decision without actually having the Palestinians listening in their, radios and applauding. Even we hear voices from Palestine that say, hey, the UN acknowledgement is another form of colonialism. We don't want that. Another thing I was thinking about just 2 hours ago, as this declaration was said by the UN, I was thinking about the basically Palestinian indigenous people or Bedouin that we have in Palestine within the borders of Israel, and the beef that they have with the Palestinians in Gaza. Now, mind you, some of them, yes, some of them were informants, but hey, a lot of informants get killed. Um, and so the other type is the people that literally did not have money to get up and leave, to get from these territories, okay, around Beersheba city, what now we have Arat, Kaseife, definitely up in the north, to get up and go. I think it is about 100 kilometers at least, or 150 kilometers to Gaza, or to the Gaza Strip. That somebody needed to pay for that, somebody needed to fund for that, and the people that did not have money, they just stayed, and those of them that survived, now they are Israeli citizens. And I was thinking about the civil war clock and the fact that a lot of the civil war in Israel, which is both around the seventh house malleability and Uranus in the ninth house, is actually also between those Palestinians from Palestine, from the Palestine, and those Palestinians that are within the borders of Israel, fighting one and another, and they were put in different positions, each with its pros and cons. I can tell you, when I lived in Beersheba city, whenever there was a missile attack, we would know it's coming to the city, because they threw it on the Bedouin villages first, until I asked a lady, what's the deal with that? And she said, when we go, my husband is an Israeli officer in the army, and she's a nurse, and she says, when we go to Gaza, they give us double the price. They hate us because we live in Israel. And I'm like, but isn't that the fact that you couldn't go to Gaza? You didn't have the money to go to Gaza. Well, some of them were informants, but mostly they did not have. And you think about it, a lot of the people even that were informants is because they didn't actually have the money to travel to Gaza. Nobody wants to be an informant. And so, as I was thinking about it, I did not know that, but that was the UN decision. So basically, we have Uranus in Gemini, which is great, but we do have Sun, Mercury, conjoining Ketu, Mercury Kazimi. I do believe we will have another Declaration of Independence, and basically, this is happening while there are attempts to exterminate Hamas. And every time they say that they kicked off the Hamas elite, once in Doha, once in Turkey, what they're kicking off, I think, is the Israeli allies, but okay. It is indeed challenging. And definitely, you can jab the IDF, and like, a lot of people would even agree with you. But in general, I think we don't really like to have terror trafficking, human ritual abuse for anything military, and jabs on naval. I'm like, hey, I'm the one talking about MK Ultra. So, and the fact that the milieu is targeted individuals. So, yeah, yeah. So we have Uranus in Gemini. The moon is in Gemini as well. And the moon would be right now at about the middle decan probably of Gemini. So while Mercury is with Ketu, which unfortunately, while the moon in Gemini is not a bad position, in fact it's so refreshing from the Hamas moon in Capricorn position. It's not a moon in Taurus either, but moon in Gemini is not that bad. The fact that Mercury is with Ketu and the Sun is a telltale that the Palestinian people are still being purged, which unfortunately, that is also the situation right now. To be very accurate, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say unfortunately. That is, which is a telltale of the situations as a global false flag. So we have the moon in Gemini, the position of Ketu, the position of the Sun. Pluto retrograde 1 degree Aquarius, Neptune in Aries, Saturn retrograde 29 degrees in Pisces, Rahu in Pisces. Jupiter is in Cancer, and Jupiter rules religion, philosophy, and so on. Mars is separating, but still in applied aspect to square Jupiter, which means that we are still in an ongoing religious war. And this is exactly showing up with the fact that we have a juristic decision, but it is kind of at odds with the Palestinian people, some of which say, hey, that's still a colonialist move. We want something that is better than that is beyond that. In the spirit of an out-of-bound Pluto in Aquarius. So this is voices that address the deep roots of the issue with the land, with the authorities over the land, way beyond Israel. And I love that because it means that we open the conversation for something that actually addresses the roots of the problem before 48 and before Jews and before Mossad and before Israel and the globalist issue. And I think this is a very important move because we're not in 48, and anything that is founding itself right now on the basis of the aftermath of the Second World War is doing that in the wrong century. And yet we don't really have the new structures. So other positions that we have, but still a religious war, okay, an ongoing religious war, philosophical war, with the moon being in Gemini, co-present with Uranus, Uranus in Gemini, which sets this declaration or whatever that is supposed to represent at an onset of a civil war. This is not a bad thing, because with Uranus Gemini, those that take over are those that best abolish slavery. And I think it's a wise move from these Palestinian voices to talk beyond Israel, to talk beyond 1948, and to talk beyond the UN when it comes to land ownership, the form of living, colonialism, and so on. But we also want to see not just what is the no, but what is the yes part. Because going back to tribal Hamula wars, yeah, we had Bedouins doing that here in the Negev. That's not pretty. Bless them, they do take care of the doctors that kill patients because they start killing the doctors. So that's actually a good thing. But um, I said what I said. But they still have a lot of the Hamula wars, still issues with polygamy, women calling for polygamy because they don't have a husband, and and you know, whenever it's not safe for a woman to live alone, there will be disaster after disaster. So it's the question, what is the yes as per the Palestinian people, which would open a venue for innovation. And I think with Neptune Aries around the world, people are looking to Palestine as they perhaps have looked into Israel. And they're saying, hey, what will these people bring to us? What solutions? What innovation? Um, where are they going to take the discourse? And of course, how will they fund for that? And so on and so forth. As per Venus. So Venus is in Leo. She is squaring Uranus, already applying to square Uranus, um, but and applying to in conjunct both Pluto and Saturn, Neptune. So Venus here is in a very difficult situation, and she's ruling Mars. Um, by the way, ruling over the ascendant of Israel. Mars is now in the ascendant of Israel, as per the Libra ascendant chart, and there's just a lot of happenings. Particularly the unfairness of the way Venus people in general acted by the influence of Israel and within Israel. I will not elaborate at this point, but that's a big issue. And while that Mars is in conjunct in Uranus Sedna, squaring, applying to square Pluto, in conjuncting Saturn and Neptune, Venus also has its inconjuncts, and the only thing harmonious is the trine, the applying trine to Chiron, to Aries in Aries, which is basically the Palestinian discourse being re-included, the validity of their people to have any sort of a country or the closest approximation that the UN can express. Side by side to Israel. Again, this Venus is sextiling Mars. So we have both Venus and Mars in very intricate positions, but sextiling one another. Which does tell of an agreement. But again, what is missing? The Palestinians. So, no, we did not hear a Palestinian Declaration of Independence, not anywhere near 1948. The celebrations that even my colleagues were like, we're going to celebrate something and so on. Well, that's not necessarily how the Palestinians see that. Okay? So, and this is very important to remember because we're not in 1948. We're not in the aftermath of the Second World War. We're not in the same bisextile. Back then, Neptune was in Libra. Now Neptune is in the opposite sign. Okay? Pluto is in the opposite sign. Uranus still was in Gemini. This is true. But this is a different, and even, it's not exactly a mirror image, but it's a different type of setting, and it's not the legal acknowledgement that the Palestinians want. They actually are seeking something that is way beyond that. But all we have, all we have that is an approximation is indigenous claim for land. But we remember that the indigenous tribes were just killing each other all the time. So we need something that is actually peace-giving and life-giving. And to say indigenous does not suffice. But this is also where we are at this threshold where innovative solutions and practically thinking about the future and about how to make that future not another Templar project, which is good, that's colonialist, but also not another pack of tribes fighting each other, which is how we got to colonialism to begin with. So this is Declaration of New York to solve the Palestinian conflict and two-state solution. It's supposed to be something that is not something that people can turn over. And indeed, in the shade of eclipses, the eclipse that was a lunar eclipse represents the people. And that is indeed something that one cannot bring back to what it was. But is it the real deal? I don't know. They're looking for a Palestinian state. Again, what I see here, and as a person who's been tending to those things on and off since age 12, I believe, and to the political assassinations that accompanies such agreements, they're now doing to Benjamin Netanyahu what they did to Yitzhak Rabin, including the Intifada, which is why we see terror attacks in Israel, in Haredi neighborhoods as well in Israel. Is another issue there that I wish it was about Epstein, but it's not. And so what I can see is yet another attempt to force and coerce the Palestinians to fit into a frame that they do not accept upon themselves, while not really reaching out the hand to the women and the children that want the fuck out of that indigenous setting in a way that is not another form of child and human trafficking wrapped as saving or so. And so this is something that I saw when I was 12. Okay, the people completely resisting a very artificial peace agreement that nobody was really welcoming, and it was not really building a state. It was supposed to be a building block for something. And that's what I've been seeing from the Saudi initiation, yet an oil giant in the time where people moved to solar energy and fusion energy. So the energy changing and the funding changes as well. And now the repetition of that by yet another fiscal geniuses. However, the fact that the politicians or the fiscal people or the people who would like to put the world into a world order see it. This move that was done is not really being fully accepted, fully appreciated. And again, I don't know what borders they intended to discuss. We are all having air situation that nullifies a lot of boots on ground. Yet, I think even in the age of air, we do not want to ignore the limitations and struggles of boots on ground. In fact, especially not because when we nullify the air, which can be done by accident with hacking, then all we have is not only boots on ground, but boots on ground without water and electricity and vehicles and sunlight. Um, but with nervous system hacking, psychic shape-shifting, and all kinds of things that look like sci-fi, included but not limited to the possibility of alien realms. So, yes, Pluto out of bounds is indeed um, interesting time. And then I think that the helplessness of trying to fit that into a two-state solution, um, while it seems like, hey, that's the only sane thing, because like, what are you going to do, another Holocaust for the Israelites and so on? But then there are plans to depopulate the entire Earth, which we see with the so-called natural disasters. Um, and so rationality not necessarily being rational, and as a person who tended to political assassination prevention, um, it is only a sane situation, and it is only a sane situation that people that are under such stress and prolonged trauma and constant life assassination sometimes have the sane reaction to an insane situation that can manifest as the many things we see on tapes that will or will not be revealed, and a lot of other things, um, which again, okay, uh, is another form of things having a trajectory when it comes to the political use of mental health, um, and at what point do we and the tension between sovereignty and accountability that is way more intricate. And I think the Saturn Neptune in Aries is also a timestamp that we have for this declaration, which is heavyweight, community related. And I know that the Palestinians love to describe themselves together with something that looks more communistic. Well, so did the kibbutz and the moshav. There's not all Palestinians. Some of them are like the liberal Templars and so, that go for the 2030 city in Gaza and maybe are invested in their never mind. I have no idea what's with Rabat, because I think the only city left is Rabat. Was Rabat bombed? And the only one that can afford to live in Rabat is like a giant oil giant sheikh that is probably not really Palestinian, but is Muslim enough to buy land and sublet to probably exiled Jewish soldiers. And yeah, not at all funny. People are still suffering the consequences, not just of war, but of the wars that people don't talk about. So yeah, the Saturn-Neptune timestamp for any declaration of independence is going to give us a more China-Russia oriented, and it's fascinating because the State of Israel, upon its foundation, was leaning Stalin. Actually, there was, when Stalin died, there was, the main newspapers were mourning his death. And in the West, we see Stalin a bit different, but that also has to do with Israel shifting and changing hands to United States I think it was in around the 50s. I'm not sure even when it happened, but it kind of shifted hands. Um, and by the way, prior to 73, Iran was our biggest oil supply. So it is only after 1973 that it's possible to even say anything about Israel, and even an almost pflicht, almost a must in the academic community to condemn Israel if you want to get published. Um, Seriously, that's been so. Um, and those were changing trajectories, and academic people just had to, paperclip themselves to wherever. Uh, so, other things on the sands of time that we have here. Pluto, Uranus. Uranus conjoining Sedna. We've yet to have a country with Uranus timestamp conjoining Sedna, because last time Sedna's been in Gemini was 12 millennia ago. I do. Inuit countries, independence for Greenland. Um, those things I predict to be on the topic, particularly with the Uranus Sedna. Now, my joke on the Navo page about a Declaration of Independence for Greenland, um, somebody talked about Denmark. Anyway, um, and they take all the minerals from the Arctic, so it's not impossible that the Inuit will have a declarations of independence, both in the Arctic, with Greenland, okay, the border with Canada, the border with Denmark, and I guess that the Palestinians are not those that communicate with the outer world in this situation, are not really ignorant of that, nor are the Inuit. Um, and so this is going to be very fascinating Declaration of Independence with Uranus Sedna. Chiron Aries, which is on the lot of, not on the lot, on Andromeda constellation, which means that it is best for such countries that every single missing and kidnapped people, particularly kidnapped, particularly those who were meant to be humanly sacrificed, that every single one of them will have the best fate possible. Because anything Andromeda Chiron is a wound around kidnapping. And this is very, very important. Okay? There is a wound around kidnapping, and the reinclusion of kidnapped people into the discourse. For example, unfortunately, only when Eris entered Andromeda constellation did we bring back Abre Mengistu, who was kidnapped to Gaza, I think a decade ago, if not more. And not only that, he didn't immediately get the funding from the welfare. So he had to go through, he had to prove that he's eligible to basically, I guess people thought he was just being kidnapped for 20 years and could go back to work, make a life while making a living or something. And so a country that declares its independence upon such trajectory, where there was ritual satanic abuse done with the kidnapped people, and very likely with the Gazan people and with the Israeli people, that's MK Ultra, that this is a country that will have to tend to this wound. And and that is, and it also leaves the question of a lot of people that are incarcerated in Israeli jail and so on. Yes, the question of kidnapped people cannot be separated from MK Ultra. in this day and age. Um, so those are more things that are indeed difficult and challenging for this Declaration of Independence. And the fact that it's a Declaration of Independence from the outside and not necessarily from the inside. So there is going to very likely be a little bit of a civil war about the right to exist of Palestine, as there was in 1948 between the secular Zionists and the Orthodoxy that lived here and thought that that the Zionists are withholding the Geulah and all those things. So the equivalent in Muslim and Christianity we're going to see with Palestine as well, because there's going to be a little bit of a civil war between should they have a Palestinian state or not. Again, in 1948, the voices that eventually won, so to speak, were the voices that say, no, we don't acknowledge, we're not a Palestinian state, Israel is a legal entity, and so on and so forth. And those voices did not wither, and yet there are many people who want to be pragmatic, have a country already, so they're going to also have a war between them. And in the cases of collision with Israel, there's going to also be collision between the Gaza Palestinians and the Palestinians that lived with the Blue ID in Israel. More things I can say about today's chart. So I think we went through all the planets. I don't have an ascendant in midheaven. Yeah, I don't have an ascendant in midheaven. Yeah, Israelis also are not really accepting that, but I think when it comes to the UN, people are not really taking Israel into account. Although they do talk about the two-state solution, which again necessitates some things probably that now Israel will also have objection to, particularly those that fantasized on a villa in Gaza, which is, you know, yeah, but with the way the real estate has been around Epstein rings, I'm like, I can't blame them. They thought they lived in a world where they thought that those are the deals, particularly real estate-wise. There's even an American group of people that were defending some places in Gaza, talking about making Gaza great again. And I'm like, right now there are death and concentration camps for the homeless in the United States. Started in Biden's regime, by the way. That's not, Trump did not invent that. But he also did not abolish that. In fact, he enhanced that, and not just for immigrants. Not that it's forgivable for immigrants, but it's not just as be deported or go into a death camp, but also, yes. And to the defense of the United States, he did set some immigrants on the plane back to their countries. So some. Some became Congress members, I think, and so, I don't know. But yeah, when it comes to real estate endeavors, but again, I think the only city I didn't hear being bombed is Rabat, which no Palestinian can afford to live in without being called the equivalent of a capo, and not towards Israel. Anyway, false flags and bye-bye.